Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and welcome to Chasing Self Actualization with Marisol Sanchez.
And Janaiah von Hassel.
I just need to point out my cute shoes.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
I wanted them to get some attention. They're adorable. So for our listeners, you'll have to find our video so that you can see Marisol's shoes.
They're very cute, pink and red. Episode number 4. This was one of your guests that you brought.
Yes, this is Steve Sisler, and I am going to mess up all the things he is, but he's an axiologist, and he does behavioral profiles for corporations that want to use this for either recruiting or, to help their team build their teams. He's also a book writer. He does a lot of public speaking, and he's just a phenomenal guy. Been in my life for a couple of years now, and just been really this great presence. He's just he come as soon as you see him. One of the things I've said about him before is like, in some ways he seems almost unremarkable. Like, I don't know what I would say if I said like, oh, that guy who's, but he just stands out. Like, just being around him, I feel he brings a peace and calm about him. And so I just thought he'd be great for this podcast because he's somebody that I see who's very far in his journey of chasing self-actualization.
Well, I met him in our interview, but I read one of his books, and I took the assessment that he does with businesses, and it was really interesting. That what I got from the book, what I remember getting from the book, was that idea of self-trust. Again, that's a common theme in this, is learning to trust myself. And again, I think, call it God, Yahweh, higher power, whatever you want to call it, that energy is picking these guests for me to learn something from, because I feel that I still need to learn to trust myself and trust that instinct or voice isn't the devil. Basically. Yeah.
One thing I love about Steve, he has first off, he's like a fun-loving guy. He's just fun. He's having fun with his life. Like, that's something, if you know him, he's enjoying his life. I just love that. He's not taking this all so seriously. He's not trying to self-actualize. Like, he's so chill about it. Yeah. And I think it's one of those things we see in life when somebody's like, either way, like, everything kind of works out for them. But he never makes, when we've had conversations, because he's done my profile and he knows a lot about my career and he's given me some consultant, and he never makes anything seem wrong. It's just where you're at. There's nothing wrong with where you're at, nothing wrong with what you think. There's nothing wrong with how you feel. And so there's like a piece about, like, we're just in this journey and we are where we're at and we don't need to be somewhere else. Yes. He has that for himself. And so he can carry it for other people. I'm always like, there's always somewhere else I need to be. And so he kind of like reminds me, like, no, I'm exactly where I need to be, whether it's preferred or not. That's something I've learned from him that's, really stuck with me.
I remember from the interview him mentioning something about, I don't know if he said psychedelics or what he was talking about.
We discussed that, right?
Yeah. When it came up, I remember thinking, oh, thank God. I can do psychedelics and try to chase myself. No, I have not tried psychedelics recently or anytime in the last 20.
It's been a minute.
It's been a minute. But I felt the sense of, like, we're not chasing being perfect because it's not attainable. Perfection is not attainable.
Right.
But I think chasing your self-actualization includes possibly experimenting with things. Like, I'm very interested in doing ayahuasca. It's something that's...
he's explored a lot of that. And, I've done some of that with him. And it was a really neat experience. And I support that. I think some people, David Asprey is a book writer who wrote a book that discusses it in more detail. And he says, you can kind of like take 5 years of therapy, spiritual development, and just like cram it into one afternoon. I'm all for shortcuts. But no, he discusses a little bit about that, but just in general, he has a really, I think like my takeaway and what I always learn from him and love is like, I always kind of walk away feeling fine. Like, I'm fine.
Like it's going to be okay.
It's going to be okay. These like little, and if you can live your life like that, if you can, he does a great job of detaching from the outcome. He's just doing what he's doing. And if the outcome's different than he expected, then he pivots. Yep. And this is something I think I see in all the guests and people that I look up to, is just an ability to let go of control.
I call it accepting reality as it is.
Yeah. And we don't have control. So they're just recognizing reality and we're just not. Yeah. But there's such a relaxedness about that, that I just find, when you're around him, you feel that way yourself. You're like, I'm cool.
Yeah, I felt that. I did. I felt like, I remember he was actually the first time we recorded together with a guest, and that's how I felt leaving there. I didn't have any shadow work. Like I didn't leave there feeling
He's never going to be like, your shadow self, or like not his shtick at all. Yeah. Just a little, just lighthearted. Yes. But, he's enjoying his life. And I think if there's a takeaway there at all, like that's, maybe you would enjoy your life differently than he does, but life is to be enjoyed. It's to be lived, and it's not, even in the title, Chasing Self Actualization, I know what we mean, and I love that title, but it almost implies that we're trying to be somewhere else. And I really think that in the effort, in the trying, so much is lost. Mm-hmm. And so we're already somewhere great, like right here today, with all of the problems that we have to find solutions for, and all of the, dreams that are already realized, like we're good. Yeah. And I think that's something that, if I spend enough time like in his books and hanging out with him, I'm like, oh, we're good.
We're good. We're okay. We're okay. Well, I think that's a perfect cutaway to introduce our fourth guest,
Steve Sisler. We are so excited to have Steve Sisler here with us today. Steve Sisler is the founder and CEO of the Behavioral Resource Group. And for more than 35 years, Stephen's been an innovator in the areas of personal motivation, life and business consulting, family relationship dynamics, and spiritual development. Stephen has lectured at the EO Entrepreneurial Masters Program at MIT, among other places. And Stephen was one of the very first guests that came to mind for me when Marisol and I decided to do this podcast. And my reason for thinking of Steve Sisler when I think about what is self-actualization is because, Steve, I have to say, I think you're one of the most authentic people I've ever met. And there's something about the way that you live your life where, from my perspective, it looks like you are always chasing your highest passion with no insistence on the outcome and just letting what comes of it come. It's a trait that I try to model after what I've learned from you. And it's why I just definitely wanted to have you on today so our listeners could learn a little bit more about you. So Marisol and I both delved into a couple of your latest books. I was reading Think Like Jesus, and Marisol?
I read You First, which was perfectly timed for me as a about-to-be empty nester of 3 children. In your book, you talk so much about the self and self-worth versus self-esteem versus the voice inside you. Can you well, first, let's start off with, what is your definition of self-actualization? Like when we approached you about this podcast, what were your thoughts about the title Chasing Self-Actualization?
Yeah, okay. So so when you said that, I looked at that phrase, self-actualization, to determine if I think I actually do that. I'm big into being, and that is a thread probably through 90% of my writing. To self-actualize really is to be yourself, not to attain or find yourself. You are yourself. You wake up you, and to actualize it is to miss, in my opinion, being it. So we end up working for something we've already got.
Wow.
And I believe that the best thing we can do is just let it go. I had years ago, about 17 years ago, I had a client. They had about 1,700 employees. He was the HR head, and I had spoken with him maybe once. And then I needed to talk to him, so I called in, and he answered the phone, and I said, "Hey, Pumpkin, what's up?" And he said, "Excuse me?" I go, "It's me, you idiot." It's Steve. And he goes, "Oh my God, dude, what on earth?" And I was just being me. And I worked with them for years, and then he retired. And in retirement, I was helping him build his website for something he was doing after work. And like we became best buddies. And that began with me not being professional, just being personal, just being me. And he
Yeah.
loved it. And I'll be with clients in their home watching Last Samurai with their kids in jeans and a t-shirt, and they're running a $3 billion company,
Yeah.
you know, and I'm just being me. So I don't actualize anything. I just am.
That is the best response I could have expected. I really wondered, Steve, from what I know of you, what you would say about it. And I felt, first off, you'd be like, well, I don't chase anything.
I don't. Things chase me.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and, I write about it in other books. I'm writing a whole book about it right now called David. But King David, um, he just minded his own business and kept getting himself in really cool places. Um, I'm just going to keep watch over sheep. And then the prophet Samuel comes to his David's father and says, "I want to see all your boys in the family room right now because one of them is going to be the king of Israel." And he chooses all his sons except David. He leaves in the backyard. So he's like, "This can't be right. I'm not feeling it. You got another kid somewhere?" He's like, "Oh, crap. You mean David?" So he comes in and he goes, "Yeah, that's him." Like David's like, "Oh, crap. Now I'm going to have to be a king." Like this is his whole life story. And I feel like that's my life story. Like, I just wake up, come into this office, open up the email, and it's like, "Steve, I want you to meet somebody. This is the guy I was telling you about." And I'm like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah, I think you shared you have a lot of synchronicities that take place in your life. And I feel like you have a very your joy is just so real. Like your laugh's contagious. When I've been around you, to physically be around you, you just exude this, you're just waiting for the universe to delight you. Like the whole world's courting you.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what, that's what I picked up on. And I know Marisol got some great nuggets from your book that she was going to ask about. Marisol, I loved what you were picking up from You First, which is really it's kind of a guide on how to sort of do this.
Well, I loved how you just said you're worthy because you exist. You're worthy, period. There's no because of your job, no because of your financial worth. You're worthy, period. And that's sort of the era that I'm entering. I feel I just recently, I'd say in the last 5 years, identified that I was running from low self-esteem. I didn't know. I was surprised. I was like, wait, what? Me? And then I realized how I was operating from that place for a long time. So I had to kind of deconstruct that for the last few years. And now I am waking up with like, I'm worthy of love. I'm worthy of self-acceptance. I like
Yeah.
myself. I love myself. And that to be 50 and just getting there is a little sad. I'd like to help people get there a little sooner. And that's kind of my question for you is, am I wrong in this theory that a lot of people, if not most people, are operating from a place of lack of self-love and self-worth?
Yeah. So, okay, I have a database. It's pretty good size. Um, and in that database, 84% of people have a lower sense of self. In other
Wow.
words, a negative sense of self. The problem with this is the human brain does not verify if what you're believing or doing is accurate. It only justifies why you should keep doing it and believing it. Because your mind is not a scientist seeking truth, it's a White House press secretary defending your presidential policy.
Wow.
And so, because of that, we struggle to change our thinking, our feeling, and how we see ourselves in the world. So yes, most people struggle with feeling worthy. They live in this framework that I call uh, the there's two frameworks. There's the desire system, and there's a deserve system. So here's the deserve system, and I write about it in the book. I don't deserve to be treated this way. Okay, now the onus is on them to stop it, which they probably won't. Um, if I say I desire a relationship different than this, then you're going to have to go get it. So now the onus is on you to make sure the life you're living is the life you want. Most people live like they've been handed a life and they're sucked into having to live it, which isn't true. Your life is what you make it. And when I consult with people, this is where I begin. And they'll say this, that, and the other. And I'll just look at them and say, well, that's your fault. Trying to put a gun to your head and
You
make
said
you
that
do
to
all
me.
that? What are you doing that for? And they never thought of it that way. And so most people have a low sense of self and struggle to feel like they can desire what they want. And then this whole I don't deserve thing starts to kick in, but you have to fight it. If somebody, my wife says, hey, do you want to come to the store with me? I can say, no, I don't want to go. Now, she can negotiate that, which she does very well. Well, how about we stop by Hana Hibachi and get some sushi and sake? I'm like, I'll get my boots. But I don't have to go because I don't want to go. Now, if she leaves without me and slams the door and gives me the silent treatment that night and all that, well, then it wasn't, she didn't actually um, request that I come. It was a requirement, but she didn't couch it that way. So
Yeah.
you have to distinguish between requirements, requests, and what you're willing to negotiate in life. And most people really struggle to do that. So I always teach people to live from what you desire only and not what you think you deserve, because that will get you on the wrong path to live in somebody else's life.
That's a mantra right there. Steve, you were saying in your, so this is the software that you used that gives people behavioral profiles. So you said 84% of people have a negative self-worth. That makes me wonder with the 16, am I mathing right here? With the 16% who have a positive self-worth, what are some things you see that manifest in their lives, or what are the stark differences? Like, can you look at people and know who's going to have self-worth and who's not in their profile just from ways they show up in life?
The people, so a couple things. Those who have positive, some of them are over positive. And what that means is I feel like I'm being overlooked. So I'm over focused on who I am. So it's a knee jerk reaction to people overlooking them in life or them perceiving that as happening. So then the percentage of real positive is small. It's
Yeah.
probably like 1%.
Wow.
And so the people that are 1% don't aren't moved by how other people think about who they are, what they do, and what they say.
And that, I mean, that's like master level, right? That's like master level. If you're there, you're able to, because I know I'm sitting here listening to you and I'm thinking about all the people listening, all the filters, ex-employees, ex-husband, what they're thinking. How can I say something that makes me sound smarter or more professional?
Yeah.
I'm not there yet, even though I'm trying to practice that, and
Yeah.
achieving that.
Well,
It's
here's a
a
good one for you. I was in a meeting, like real important people, and I'm like, what's a KPI?
Where most people are, I went through, I kind of boomed into my career. So similarly, I didn't know what anything meant. And I'd be
Yeah.
like Googling it under the table. And actually, Steve has been a huge part of why I just started asking. And honestly, realizing like I'm not as, no one else is like that. That's your internal in your head. And most people's responses are not like that at all. They're almost
Right.
glad you
So
asked. Glad you're
here's what you
curious.
have to do to get to that position. You have to think, because I don't know something, it doesn't mean I can't know it. It just means I don't know it. Like,
Yeah.
what's wrong with not knowing something? Nothing. There's
Right.
nothing wrong with it. And if you know that, you cannot know everything and it doesn't bother you.
Wouldn't that be great?
If I
Sounds like a superpower.
if I worked in corporate America still, and I said I didn't know the KPI or what the KPIs were, I would be haunted in my meeting. And something, my co-host knows is I left corporate America after almost a 30-year career, partly because I felt like I couldn't be my authentic self. I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't, at the every day passing, I couldn't fake it on my face. I just couldn't do it. It was just, I was getting migraines. I physically felt ill
Oh, man.
because I just felt like I couldn't be myself. And
Yeah.
I imagine that I'm not the only person who kind of has this awakening and then kind of
No,
realizes.
you're not. And everybody has it, even people like Tony Robbins. If you're a human being, then you're subject to human tendencies. And there are some that affect everybody. I was speaking at an event at MIT's Endicott House with 70 entrepreneurs from all over the world as a thought leader on human behavior. And during the Q&A, somebody asked a question about human behavior. I can't even remember what the question was. And I just looked at them and said, you know what? That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. All right, next. And at the end of that meeting, that lady came up to me in tears. I said, what's going on with you? She goes, the biggest thing I learned today is that I cannot know something publicly and it's not bad.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
And she goes, that impressed me more than anything you said that you did know.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
I have a question about the deconstruction of these beliefs that we might have. So, for instance, feeling guilty. Like, I just feel guilty for existing. That's my baseline.
You said you
into,
feel guilty for existing?
yeah, born into the Catholic faith. I was told I was a sinner from birth, and I downloaded that pretty strongly into my DNA. Something's wrong with me. I'm a sinner. I'm bad. And again, almost 50, deconstructing that, realizing that wasn't true.
Right.
What are the tools you give people to help them deconstruct those things so you could just be worthy and take up space?
Psychedelics.
I like you.
We'll
That
get there
lion's mane.
real quick.
I may or may not be able to second that.
So that's
Yeah.
the God's honest truth.
Look at Ram Dass and all the people who left Harvard.
Look, I
chasing
just
that.
met with an individual. This person is in their 40s. They make $750,000 a year, and he's wearing a $40,000 watch. 1 hour into working with him, he takes the watch off and throws it across the room. He goes, I've been wearing this so people think I'm important. I'm done with that nonsense. 1 hour in. And he said since that day, it's been over 2 weeks, about 2 weeks now, his wife's been crying almost every day because of how different this person is.
Yeah.
His whole life was a charade. It was all trying to impress people who don't care what's going on in his life.
Yeah.
And now there are a lot of reasons for why he was doing that, but we were able to fix it pretty instantly.
I can second that. And I've had experience working with Steve in this capacity and almost a year ago. And I think because I'm a move on, get up and get going, get it done. Don't worry about how you feel, what you're thinking. It doesn't matter. You move towards the goalpost. So I was surprised by what came up for me was like overwhelming mom guilt that I just been like shoving down and packing with like bricks of cheese and anything else to keep it down. And when something comes up and you can move through it like in a day and you get the awareness of like the things you've been most shut off to, mom guilt or any guilt, the thickness of that is that there's literally nothing to do with it. So it just sits there like molding and rotting inside of you. And like it was gone. And I feel like I didn't quite understand these journeys before experiencing. Nothing was like, it was small. It was so small, but so noticeable just in the smallness, and actually just being able to sit, watch my kids play and feel joy and not be like, remember 3 years ago when you didn't read him a bedtime story, you piece of shit, you know?
That piece of shit voice is deep, deep. It's a hard one to get over.
Steve, I really enjoyed your book, Think Like Jesus. It was, I grew up in the Christian faith. I read the Bible so many times, you know, outlined it, reread it, memorized scriptures, and did everything to make sure that I wouldn't have to go to hell. And
here we are.
I never looked at or thought of Jesus in this way. He was God and to be worshiped, not to be modeled or understood. And so breaking it down, something that I knew, a character that I had known my whole life, but getting into his emotional intelligence was amazing. I know you were a painter who, you know, came into all of this because you had a gift and you were just present with it and you just allowed it to grow into this empire that you've built.
Yeah. So I paint somebody's house, and then I'd be talking to them about removing a storm window, and they would just say something, and I go, "What do you mean by that?" Well, you know, my wife or my husband or my son, and they start talking. I said, well, have you thought of this? And then next thing you know, we're in a 2-hour conversation, and they go, why are you a painter? Why am I a painter? Because I'm good at it. I'm fast, and I enjoy it. So I went home and I shared that story with my wife, and she goes, you know what? You need to get paid to talk to people. And I said, nobody's going to pay me to talk to them. She goes, they already are, because they're giving me tips. Like, this is for the conversation. This is for the job. So in 2005, I started the behavioral resource group. And within 7 months, I was at the financial standing I was after 16 years of painting in my own business.
Inspiring.
And all I was doing was being me. Like, I failed math in high school. I didn't go to university, and I had to take a special class to graduate.
Did you
I couldn't pass a
envision-
test if my life depended on it, because I would get test anxiety. So I thought I was stupid. So I'm like, well, I can paint, so I'll do that.
Steve, I use a lot of visualizations to create in my life, but it sounds like you like to be surprised. Is that the case?
I love surprises.
So you don't really envision something for, you know, where things are going or growing, or use visualizations for that. You just kind of be you and it just happens.
Yeah, so I'll say something like, I just said this the other day. I said, I can't wait to see what happens this year, because I don't
Yeah.
know what will happen. No one can predict that. It's impossible. There is no tomorrow, right? You read that in the You First book. There's no such thing. So all you got is right now. So to the degree that I can envision something is only now. I can't do that. You know, I could get hit by a car. So I don't know. So what I do is make the most of the opportunity I'm in. And if you keep doing that, then your future's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I don't really worry about the future. I don't think about it. I just think about now, like, what's the right thing to do in this moment? And then I'll just do that. Think of an alcoholic that says, one of these days I'm going to stop drinking.
Yeah.
Well, you never will. But if you have a sponsor, like you're part of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I feel like they have this mantra, one day at a time. And what that means is, I'm not drinking right now. Yeah. And that's all they do. And if they feel like they want to, they call the sponsor and like, I'm in a moment and I need help, and they'll come over or talk them off the cliff. You just do that every day. And then you stand up with a medallion after 16 years. Like, I've been drinking 16 years. And that's because it was moment by moment, not one of these days. So people who think about the future never arrive. The people who think out the present will have the best future.
That's awesome.
And I find that my husband's sober. He's been sober for over a decade. And I find a lot of people who've done that program, who've gone through sobriety, are some of the most present people I've met, because they practice it every single day. It's Fascinating. I have one question for you about spirituality. So I was an atheist for a large portion of my life, and it wasn't until I heard in my Chasing my Self Actualization that there was a course being taught on happiness, and one of the pillars of happiness was faith. And that sent me down a spiral
Hmm.
to figure out my faith and figure out, my spirituality, my belief system. And now, having done so for about a decade, I can't imagine being happy without my faith. Having faith is what allows me to be here today with you guys. Having faith, knowing that I'm going to be okay. Everything's going to be fine. I got that through faith. I didn't get that through work or other,
Hmm.
what society told me I was going to get. So, how much does faith play a role in living your best life?
Okay, that's a great question. That's one of my favorites. So faith is courage and trust. Courage, number one, is not the absence of fear, it's the absence of self. So think about a soldier on a battlefield rescuing somebody off the field with gunfire going everywhere. They're not afraid. Of course they're afraid, but they have an absence of self because they're more focused on saving that person than their own life. So the courageous are the people that are more self-sacrificing, not fearless. And then trust is letting go. We're not as in control as we think we are. The only thing you can control is your response to everything else. That's it. That's the only control you have.
Yeah.
And if you do that well, then you're in a good spot. And there's three kinds of control. There's in control, out of control, and under control. The under control is the best one for obvious reasons. So courage and trust is letting go and keeping yourself under control, and believing the best. And that's it. And I have found that when I do that, I have the best feelings. It's great to be able to say, you know what, I'm not going to concern myself with that. I'm going to just give that to God.
It's so amazing.
Oh, like, you mean I don't have to care? I don't have to worry about it? No, not at all. I have four objects on my desk. I've got my rhinoceros, which runs 30 miles an hour but can only see 31 feet. But that speaks to my attention deficit. They
I
call a group
like
of
it.
rhinos a crash for that reason. But I have this, a client sent it to me based on my consulting with him. I have me, whom I love dearly,
I
number
need one of
one.
those, a Steve bobblehead.
And then I have Jesus, who I follow the teachings of and pattern my life after. And then I have my little wish Nick, which is everybody needs a little bit of luck. So when I'm consulting with people, it's funny, like we'll just be chatting and they're talking and they're upset about something, and all of a sudden, they see this come in from the side of the camera and they just start laughing. Like it just breaks it. And I have clients now sending me pictures of their little Jesuses. Jesus is a point of identification. It's great to say, you know what, I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to let my boss take care of it. That's such a great
Yeah.
feeling.
It is a great feeling. It really
And so the more that's what faith is. It's saying, you know what, I'm unable to work this out, but something greater than me is. So I'm going to default to that
Yeah.
and give it up.
Steve, when I did some consulting with Steve. We were both working at a company, and he gave me some insights. And at the time, um, I had a lot of anxiety about, I was, had a lot of clients and had a lot going on and had scaled really fast. And I was telling you that one of the ways I was managing my anxiety is that I would go out to this big oak tree and I would just like hug it and just breathe. And I was like, I'm doing really good, man. Like I figured out a way to ground myself, and you were like, well, do you like pull up to a mechanic and ask for an oil change? And he's like, let me go hug a tree and breathe first. And it was the first time like I thought, it's not that I need to figure out how to move through these feelings. It's that I shouldn't be feeling like this. Like, I shouldn't be taking on the whole world thinking that I have this illusion of control that I've never had. I always say I'm really lucky, but once I get lucky, I think I did it and I got to figure out a way to keep it. So I thought that really stuck with me, that, I'd come up with so many practices where, like, I'm going to ground myself when it was, but it's not yourself. You didn't do anything. You didn't do anything to bring it in. You can't do anything to keep it, and you'll be fine when it's gone. And that's
That's
kind of
right.
that's the story of Steve, if I could put you in a nutshell.
Yeah.
It sounds like detachment. Like
I think it's that there's no insistence on the outcome, and then you get to be surprised. That's how it seems.
That's exactly right. You cannot control an outcome. We teach ourselves that we can, so that we can live with ourselves. But we don't. We do what we do, and then the rest is up to everything else, which is a lot in the universe. You have to say, well, that didn't work, ha ha ha, versus, I can't believe I failed. What do you mean? Like, I have people telling me, my job, this didn't work out, I failed. I'm like, how do you connect that? That's like me driving my car and it's making a weird noise. And then I say, what have I done now?
I failed these roads.
It's not true. So life's journey is running into things and seeing them as they are. And it's often running into yourself, but you have to see yourself as we are, not as we think we ought to be. That's future.
Yeah.
You have to stay with who you are right now. So I'll never forget this. I was 12 years old. I was watching the Waltons. I don't know if you'll know what that is,
Good
but
night,
it's an
John
old
Boy.
show that was on TV in the 70s. And it was a family. I'm not going to get into all that, but this is what happened. Elizabeth comes running into her mother and goes, Mom, Mary Ellen called me a pissant. And the mother goes, well, do you feel like a pissant? And she goes, no. And then she goes, then you're not a pissant. And she went, okay, and ran back out and played. And I was watching that and I thought to myself, is it that simple?
Is it really?
And then I realized it is. It's so simple, we miss it. Like, do you feel like a failure? No. Then you're not a failure.
I would have taken that pissant comment with me for the rest of my life. Like, I'm a pissant.
Yeah.
Like, it would just.
That's exactly right. And that's what we do, because we're looking to figure out who we are from somebody else's perspective. Jesus never did that. The opening chapter, the Bethesda incident, right? He goes to this place called the Pool of Bethesda. There's like 400 sick people. He walks up to one, would you like to be well? Like, what kind of a question is that? And I say in the book, no, I'm just here getting a suntan. Like, that doesn't make any sense. But it does make sense when you read the whole story. And so he says, just get up, take up your bed and walk, right? So the guy gets up and walks and he leaves. Well, he leaves 399 people sick. And it doesn't bother him at all.
That was so impactful to me when I read that. So much of my structures come from growing up and to model Jesus. And I never, I feel like I lack so much if I don't get to everything. And when I read that, I'm sitting on my couch, it was a Saturday afternoon and so many things undone. And just reading that, and you bring such a premise of, like, he was present with the people he was present with, and you talked about the rich young ruler coming up, and he's basically like, I don't know, sell everything, just be gone. I'll let you know if I want to talk more later. Like, it was just in his own alignment, and it wasn't about meeting everybody's needs.
Yeah. Jesus wasn't seeker friendly.
Yeah.
He wasn't looking for a following.
No, he qualified. Like, God doesn't take volunteers. I don't. If you read the whole Bible, you'll see that is a fact. He doesn't take volunteers. So this guy's like, what do I do to inherit eternal life? Sell everything you have, give to the poor, and follow me. After the guy said, well, I've already kept the commandments. Okay, if you want to be mature, sell everything, give
Yeah.
it away, and then come follow me. And he goes, that's crazy. He goes, well, that's the deal.
You know
I'll
what? The
talk to you
lesson in
later.
that for me was don't ask twice. If he would have just been like, okay, got it.
Yeah.
Don't
Yeah,
ask
I
twice.
know. I
You've
know.
already done the first answer. Good. I'm golden. Thanks. I'm out.
Yeah. Yeah. So, that's how we have to be. You can't, it's never everyone, but it's always someone.
Yeah.
And it's never everything, but it's always something. So every day I say, what is my someone and what is my something?
Oh, that's good.
If you think you've got to save the world, and you're going to live a life of utter failure. But if you know you're only responsible for what shows up in front of you, life is easy.
Wow. I have one last question, and I want to get to it before I forget, which is the intuition or that voice or the Holy Spirit, whatever name you want to give it. How do you learn to trust it? Because I feel like every time that voice comes up for me, I'm like, are you sure? Really? Are you? And I don't
Yeah.
trust it. I don't trust my own voice.
Yeah. Okay. I love that question. It's another good one. So in Hebrews, the book of Hebrews, no one knows who wrote that, but in that book, it says that I'll just skip to the one sentence, those who by reason of use have exercised their spiritual senses to discern between right and wrong or good and evil. So how do you hear that voice and get accustomed to that voice? By acting on it no matter what. So I started acting on this when I was young. So I'd have situations where somebody would so here's a situation. Somebody called me up and said, hey, I want to run a test, do one of your tests. Family member. I said, okay. And I lived 1,500 miles away. So they did the assessment, whatever. And then I forgot about it. And then they called me up again the next day. Hey, did you get the results? I said, oh, I forgot about it. You want to know them? He's like, yeah. I said, well, you got a few minutes? I got a few minutes. Sure. So I pulled up the assessment. And I looked at it. And the first thing that popped into my head was this. He's been looking at pornography at work and he got fired. Now, I thought of that looking at the numbers. So I said, you were looking at pornography at work and got fired. He goes, yeah, Tuesday.
Wow.
Yeah.
That would have been a rough swing and a miss, though, if you were wrong.
Yeah, I had another guy. He came up to me and he said, this was at church when I used to go to church. So they had me as one of the designated prayer people. I'd go up and pray for people. So this guy comes up to me, never been there before. I go, you been here before? Nope. Why are you up here? He goes, I'm afraid of heights, and I paint landscapes. He got a little choked up. I can't climb the mountains I paint. And I said, that's interesting. And then I heard in my head, tell him he's not a little shit.
And you just said it.
I just said it in my own voice, in my own head. So I just looked at him and said, well, let me tell you something. You're not a little shit. What does that have to do with mountains or the fear of heights? Nothing. So I said that, and he starts to cry uncontrollably. And then I said, dude, what's going on? My dad was an alcoholic, and all he called me was, you little shit. All growing up, and every time I look in the mirror, that's all I see. And I just said, well, I guess that's not true.
Wow.
He's like, you going to pray for my fear of heights? I said, no, that wasn't it. That wasn't your problem. I never saw him again. I've been doing this for 35 years, 40, 50 maybe.
Jeez.
Tell my mom, that person's lying to you.
You just trust it. You just trust it.
I just trust it.
You just trust that voice.
What about when it's wrong? How have you managed that?
But people just say, well, that's not true. I said, okay, I just thought I'd ask. I just thought I'd mention it because sometimes it is.
And that's being okay with, you have to be okay with being wrong.
It's not wrong to be wrong. It's wrong to stay wrong.
Oh, that's cool.
Ah, that's liberating. Everybody's wrong. Everybody's wrong. You're going to be wrong today. So I'd rather be wrong about that than something else. So I would rather risk being wrong than being right and never bringing it up. And I can tell you, I am right over 85% of the time.
I had that on February 8th. I woke up, I did my meditation, and the voice was telling me, you have to give in your 2 weeks notice. You have to quit your job. And this was the job I could have carried to retirement. No, I would have had security for the rest of my life, 6-figure job. And I'm like, are you sure? Are you sure? And I did it. I gave notice. As soon as I hit notice, I got a call with another job offer immediately, not even related. And I was like, wow, I guess you were right. But but it takes so much faith to do that.
You
It
have
really,
to, yeah, you have to practice it. Just keep practicing it, which is what I do. I always practice it. I was consulting at a company in Denver, and the lady came in, this glass walls, and CEO is right over there. I can see him. We waved. And she sits down. I look at her numbers on the assessment. We're talking. I said, she's about 32. I said, what marriage are you in, 1 or 2? She goes, 2. I said, is it working out? She's like, no. I said, that's because you have a problem with men. And she just starts crying. So for an hour, we just talked. That was the consulting at the company. I've been working with this company for 12 years.
Wow.
I remember reading this book uh, about 2 weeks ago, preparing for this interview, and I went through a whole self-sabotage. Like, I just reading your book and feeling how authentic you were coming through on the book, I didn't feel like I was deserving enough to sit here and interview you. I went through the whole, who do you think you are? Blah, blah, blah. And then I finally was like, I told her, I was like, I need to fast because I was eating so much junk, like self-sabotaging myself in stress and that voice in my head, that I started fasting. And then when I started fasting, I started realizing how silly those thoughts that I were having was, and that, I would be perfectly fine and everything was going to be okay and not to worry. But it is
Yep.
weird trusting
The
that voice.
three of us sitting here together in different places in the universe have equal value. It's equal. You can't scale human value. It's unscalable. We all are living the lives we're choosing to live. And if you choose to believe that you have intrinsic value that cannot be scaled, you'll have a different life trajectory than if you don't. And I've shared the stage with some pretty famous people. It doesn't. I'm not like, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, look who it is. I don't do that. And people will tell me there's a whole line of people like got to talk to that person, and I'm just sitting there chatting with my wife on text. I don't even go up. Um, and because I realize they're me and them, no different. No difference.
And Steve, that's how you treat people too. Like in conversations where I've talked to you, you were able to bring that you might be talking to somebody who just had center stage. So I don't even think that it's you treat those people less. It's that you treat everyone like they deserve center stage. And when you treat somebody like that and they can feel that for a moment, they have something to hook into and something that they can be. And that's a huge thing that I wanted to do with this podcast and with myself, is just to become something that can inspire other people. Because
Mm-hmm.
when somebody sees us in the light of all we are, we can begin to see ourselves. It's like an invitation. Hey, would you like to see
Mm-hmm.
yourself with intrinsic value and it can't be
Mm-hmm.
scaled? It's like you look at someone like that and they're like, and I think that's actually what you talked about and Think Like Jesus too. It's like matching the frequency. It's you're inviting, hey, do you want to feel like this? If they say yes,
Mm-hmm.
you've set it out for them.
And that's kind of how we came to be. It was she literally just sat next to me with her big eyes and said, I have a dream of podcasting. And I had been simultaneously be praying for a co-host that would be in alignment to what I was dreaming about. And boom, it was like a magnet immediate. And it was just instantly like that voice saying, yes, she's the one. And I remember after we met and decided to do this, I remember thinking, I don't know her. I'm hinging this on her. She could be a serial killer.
That doesn't mean I can't do podcasts too.
That could come out in episode 4. But it was that feeling of trust of like, we're on a frequency, and we both, when we had that first brunch, we both were, it's not about us. We want what we're experiencing right now, which is a fulfillment in our lives for other people. When people are like, there's something about you, you seem so happy, you're glowing. This is what I want to give them, that it's this gift.
Yep. I shared a stage with a former Miss America once. And then after, she contacted me and was crying on the Zoom. Life was falling apart, losing her house. It was terrible. And I said, well, here's what we're going to do. Let's consult weekly. I can't afford it. I said, yes, you can, because you're not paying for it. And I just knew in that moment I had to do that. I worked with her for probably 8 weeks. And I said, do you have a diary? She said, yes. I said, get rid of it. Why? I says, I want you to start a diary.
Ooh.
And
that's cool.
She goes, what is that? I said, it's not what's going on. It's what you want to be going on. And then write that. So she did. She got a notebook and she wrote on it diary and started doing that. And then I didn't hear from her for a while. She got in touch with me. She wouldn't believe what happened. I said, what? My son's friend, his mother came to pick him up or what have you. And I started talking with her, and one thing led to another. And I ended up saying, hey, I'm in the process of losing my home, blah, blah, blah. If I remember this right, like her husband bought her house and then said, you get yourself situated, and then when done, I'll give it back.
Wow.
So she got to stay in her childhood home.
Wow.
And since then, she was a spokesperson for some company. Her whole life changed, like completely flipped. Would that have happened if I said, well, it's going to cost you?
Yeah.
That's why I feel hesitant to ever like sell a product or say this is the way to, anything, self-actualization or anything, because I feel like it's such an individual journey. Like my chasing self-actualization is like my fingerprint. I had to deconstruct the stuff in my life. So who am I to say to you, this is it? But there are people like you who are subject matter experts who have the data, who analyze the data, and you see the commonalities, you see the patterns to help people.
Well, I do a lot of study and research within my sphere, call it a craft, because that's what I do. Say, this is who I am. Stevie, I'm Stevie, that's who I am. And then this is what I do. When I do whatever it is I do, it gets everything, all my attention, all my research, all my study, because that's what I do. I don't half-ass anything. That's what I do. So I am going to be the best in the world, or I'm not doing it. That's how I do everything. And that's just me. So I become known for what I know. And then what starts happening? Well, when you're faithful with the gifts you have, then you get more.
Yep.
If you're not, even what you have will be taken from you. So whatever you're good at, be damn good at it. Whatever you're good at, be the best. Give it everything you got. And then you're qualified now for everybody who needs what you've got to give it to them, because you've, quote, mastered it. So that's what I try to do. I try to master what I do so that I become the master. So you can only receive what you recognize.
Wow. That's another good quote. Yeah.
That's what Jesus taught. He said, if you receive a prophet in the name of a prophet, you reap the prophet's reward. In other words, if Jesus shows up to his hometown Nazareth, which he did, and they're like, oh my God, look who it is. It's Joseph's little boy. It's the carpenter's son. So what did he get to do in Nazareth? Nothing. It's a big dud. But when he's walking down the street and the woman who's been bleeding for 12 years goes, oh my God, if I could just touch the hem of his garment, I'll be made whole. That's what she got, because she recognized it. So you have to have people recognize you for what you do so they can receive it. If they don't recognize it, they can't have it.
Well, I feel like that's a perfect place.
Yeah. I'm so glad. Thank you so much, Steve, for coming on. You did not disappoint. Not that
Thanks
you
for
care.
having me.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We really have this in our heart that we want to help as many people, at least just to plant that mustard seed of chase the best version of yourself. This is your life. Live it. Be the best.
Yeah, great. Thank you. I'm glad you're doing this. The world needs more of you. Keep it up.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye, Steve.
And that is another episode of Chasing Self Actualization. Thank you for joining us. Please make sure to like and subscribe and follow us for more information.
And to learn more about our guest or what we're doing next, you can check out our website at ChasingSelfActualization.com.